to kick off, I would just first love to thank everyone for attending and do a quick overview of what we're all covering today. So we'll be spending the next hour going over the latest research that MIRZA did very briefly, but mainly hearing from these three incredible women. So we're going to spend just the first few minutes going through some introductions. So I'd love to just first introduce our panel. I'll start with just the way that folks are oriented on my screen. So top right-hand corner on my end, Debi. Debi is the founder and CEO of Villyge, and I'll just let Debi give a very quick intro to herself as well.
Sure. Thank you, Saran, for having me here. Excited to be here. So I am the founder and CEO of Villyge. What Villyge does is we connect working parents with parenting experts, career coaches, and wellness specialists to ensure that working parents no longer need to choose between achieving their personal family goals and career success, which is what we're all here to talk about. And we also work with companies to build out parent-friendly workplaces.
Thanks, Debi. And then next I'll rotate over down to Achia. We're going clockwise, I think.
Thanks, Saran. Thank you for having me. My name is Achia Swift. I am the head of global employment at PagerDuty, which is a tech company here in Silicon Valley in California. I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing for about 24 years, and that entire time I have focused on the defense side and have mostly focused on employment law. For the past 15 years, I've been in-house. And so I have worked at several different companies from Intel to 24 Hour Fitness, Sun Edison, Uber, and now PagerDuty. And so I focus on compliance, litigation, and I'm also a mom of a 10-year-old son.
And then finally, Eve.
I'm so happy to be here. I feel like this is hopefully the beauty of the pandemic is that people actually now start caring about things we've all been probably screaming about for the past decade. I come to the motherhood penalty from research in the home. I didn't set out to be an expert on the gendered division of labor in the home, but a breakdown over off-season blueberries and becoming the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs led to a 9-year quest to understand what was happening to my career and marriage. I'm also a lawyer by trade, and I specialize in organizational management. So I started to ask the question of what happens if we treat our home as our most important organization. And I started to see like the benefits, not only just to fairness and mental health for women, but also the motherhood penalty. So I come from it from a slightly different angle, but I'm really excited. That's why I have my pen out to also learn from my fellow panelists.
Oh, thanks everyone. So honored to have you three lawyers and former lawyers and just incredible career women joining us. I think I'll also just say that I don't know if I'm not sure if Eve mentioned, she didn't, that she's also the best-selling author of a book, Fair Play, that I think a lot of the folks here would be really interested in. So the overview of our time today, we'll do a really quick synopsis of our latest white paper, and then please submit questions throughout, and we'll be able to go over your questions. We have some questions that we'd love to talk through with the panelists. And then in the last 5 or 10 minutes, we'll move on over to audience Q&A. Great. So first and foremost, before we even dive into the motherhood penalty and our latest research, you're all moms, you're all lawyers or used to work as lawyers. Have you experienced the motherhood penalty, and could you walk me through your experiences? We can start with Debi since you're currently unmuted.
Sure. Well, many people know my story here. I first entered working parenthood when I was working as a lawyer within the finance industry. I was working at an investment bank, and not a week before I made the announcement to my department that I was pregnant, I was told in jest that if I was ever to get pregnant, I would be killing my career. So before I even announced that I was going to be a mother, this was the backdrop to which I made my announcement. Going forward, before I headed out on leave, it was absolutely brought up to me that I might have a few other options when I returned back. Some of which were, absolutely mommy type positions. And while, motherhood penalty in the truest sense of the word, meaning, or, which is like the breakdown of the money loss, I didn't experience that per se, but I experienced the culture that surrounds that drives mothers to earn less over time. And so, as it happened for me, I ended up just choosing to opt out and create a different pathway for myself. And hopefully together, all of us here are paving a broader pathway for many other working mothers to come.
Thanks for sharing, Debbie. I guess we'll go in the same order as we did for intro. So Achia, over to you.
Yes, I think I've experienced it in two different ways. The first way I've actually seen advising employers, and I see it often with maternity leave and medical leave in general. And that is when you come back from maternity leave and it's time for your performance review. The year prior, you've been out for some time, right? And we all know that performance review ratings are tied to, your race, right? And so what sometimes managers do is they focus on the entire year, and they focus more on the quantity of your work versus the quality of your work. So if you were gone for 6 months, right, of course you didn't produce as much as everyone else on your team. And so my performance rating actually was lower than I had anticipated. Because the focus was, well, hey, you didn't produce as much as everyone else on your team. I was like, well, I wasn't here, I was having a baby. And so I didn't get the raise that I deserved. And once that happens to you, you never really catch up. The second experience of mine, and I've seen this not just with myself, but with employees at employers I have advised and friends and family, is when you're a new mom, you can't go out after, you can, but you're not going to hang out as much as you did after work before. And so then sometimes you're seen as, you're not really a team player. You're not as dedicated to your position. Why weren't you at the happy hour, right? And so that will show up in performance reviews. You're not as dedicated as other employees. And so your performance review is tied to your rating, which is tied to your pay. So that's how I've experienced it in the past.
Yeah, I just want to say it's so frustrating because what was just shared is, commonplace. And while that wasn't my personal journey, that's all of our personal journeys. And so it's not just, there's so much to talk to here, but we absolutely have to consider how we handle the performance ratings, how we are, how we must rethink what it means to be a team player, time in the seat versus what actually gets done when you're there, not on leave, is what we need to check. And these are things that we talk to employers day in and day out every day. Like before you go out on leave, that's the time to have the review. When, you're able to, before you go out, look at your transition plan and show everybody what a rock star you've been, because your hand's in 52 cookie jars and like someone's going to need to pick up that weight when you're gone. That's when you need to have the performance review, because that's when the boss or the manager is going to realize, hey, I cannot, I'm not going to be able to handle all of this without Achia here. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I think we're all really aligned here that this is the performance-driven culture and the kinds of employer cultures that we need. So Eve, I'll pass it over to you to wrap up for sharing our experiences before we dive in.
Great question. Same thing. I think language really matters. If anybody takes anything away from today, I hope it's that you never use the word opt out again or left. Women are forced out. And that should just be what you say, that I forced this woman out of the workforce. And if maybe she opted out, great. But that's usually the exception. And the way I look at it is, yes, there's a lot of threat, I think, to an identity when you're going to add a caretaker role. From my research, employers, managers get threatened by that, especially because what keeps me up at night is that and I don't know the stats in the UK for this particular issue, but in the US, 70% of the 1% of men, the men who are making our decisions in government and in corporate America, have the most traditional family structure imaginable. They have stay-at-home wives. And so that keeps me up at night, because when you think about empathy being really important from a managee example, or even from a direct performance review, how can you get empathy when you have no idea what that person's lived experience is, when literally everything um, is taken care of for you, right? So I think that's what I look at. The other thing is, of course, it happened to me. I'm on a campaign. I think the legal industry is so far behind everybody else. They've literally created two classes of employees, right? You have partner and you have of counsel. And of counsel make less. There's more women who are of counsel in law firms. And what they do is they make you bleed for flexibility. And so you're going to be paid less. You're going to have a lesser of a title, often because people choose of counsel because they needed more flexibility and less billable hours. So there are actually industries that build in a motherhood penalty. But obviously, as Debbie and Achia just said, it's usually more insidious, and it's usually a direct manager issue, and it's often a psychological safety issue. So for me personally, it was my boss saying, I can't let you work from home on Fridays because that's my arrangement. And if I tell the powers that be that that's my arrangement and ask for it for you, they may tell me I can't do it. So psychological safety reverberates down. It affects you through your manager, but it's really set by the company culture at the top.
Thanks for sharing, and thank you everyone again for sharing these personal stories and already just drawing these deeper connections to the ecosystem and the structure as a whole. So this is a really great segue to talk about what we're all here to do. And so a quick introduction of myself. I'm Saran. I'm one of the co-founders of MIRZA, and we're here, our whole reason for existence is to end the motherhood penalty. And so we can do a brief overview of the research we recently did and the report. So our latest report was to unpack the motherhood penalty and then to talk through the strategies that women have used to try to manage it. So quick review of the data. A 2018 study from the Institute of Women's Policy Research found that just 1 year out of the workforce over a 15-year span wound up taking a 39% hit for women's earnings during that time, as compared to women who just work straight through. And this penalty has increased over time. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the motherhood penalty. We're in this position that we're spending more and more time now with children than we did in the 60s. But then unlike the 1960s, women are working full-time jobs. And so we don't have federal paid leave. Childcare is wildly expensive. And so we often see women dropping out of the workforce to avoid these costs. And that time, as we know, really adds up. And so there's a recent survey that Modern Fertility did, and this found that the majority of us are delaying having our first child until we just have a little smidge more money. And so, really interestingly, a researcher at the US Department of Labor, Dr. Landivar, actually did analysis of whether or not this works. And she found that delaying children really only helps women in very specific industries, very specific roles. So there's a benefit for lawyers, there's a benefit for financial advisors, there's a benefit in finance in general, but also in some lower wage occupations, there's also a penalty for delaying motherhood. So it's actually just all over the board. And we don't have the information that we need and the support that we need to actually make this work. And so at MIRZA, we wanted to see what the impact really looks like. And based on her research, we modeled out a couple of professions, and I'll call out two. So lawyers for one, because everyone on this panel, except for me, has gone to law school and knows the profession. And so for lawyers, starting a family early has roughly a 10% penalty. And then the other group I'll call out is teachers. Teachers have about an 8% penalty. For delaying starting families though, lawyers on average wind up earning 12% more than their peer group, but teachers don't actually earn any more than average for delaying starting a family. And so for these occupations, for lawyers, starting a family early versus starting a family late winds up netting over $1 million over the course of our lifetimes in the difference. And then teachers effectively lose about 200K over our lifetimes for starting families early. And that just doesn't make any sense, especially when we delay starting families, fertility costs start racking up. So we're just going to end here with a quote directly from Dr. Landivar's study, and then we'll dive right into questions. So delaying childbirth may be an effective strategy to mitigate the wage penalty among the minority of women employed in high wage occupations that require extensive career preparation. But women in low wage occupations experience little economic benefit from older motherhood. These results challenge the broader narrative that individual women can improve their long-term earnings and partly overcome the structural motherhood wage gap by delaying fertility. Rather, expanding work-family policies, benefits, and flexibilities across occupations may show better promise in reducing the motherhood wage gap than delaying motherhood. For an academic, I think that's a pretty resounding statement of what needs to be done. So let's start at the very beginning. Is there a perfect moment in time to have a child for the working mother in today's day and age?
I'll jump in. No, there's never a perfect time, right? We can't just look at it from an economic point of view and statistics. Everybody is an individual and everybody has their own journey. So everyone's has to enter parenthood when it's right for them. As the panelists here know, I am a mother of 5 and every child is born into a different family. So I had children in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, and every child had a different experience. They had a different sense of financial security that they entered the world with. And they also had a different level of energy from their mom, you know? And so personally speaking, and just how you are going to come to parenthood, you're going to bring different perspectives, whether you start early or start late. And that's absolutely a personal decision. And I think the energy can't be spent so much on these calculations, but we need to use these calculations as motivators to change society so it no longer has to be a question and can simply rest on the personal decision of the individual, and we don't have to address these issues, you know, hopefully, ideally one day, because we can change the machine that is corporate America.
Thanks for sharing, Debbie. I think we'll go into a question for any of our panelists who are willing to share. And this is a very personal question. Did any of you delay having a child because you thought the same thing, that waiting until you're a bit more senior, a bit more experienced, and that would help?
Yes. It was a conscious decision. I knew that law firm life was going to be very difficult to have a child working at a law firm and having billable hours. So for example, let's say your firm requires you to bill 2,000 hours a year. We're actually probably working 2,500 hours because you're not billing every single hour. I worked every Sunday, a full work day, for 8 years when I worked at the law firms. So I knew that having a child would not in those circumstances. And then I was also watching what was happening to women at the firms who were deciding to have children, and how they would eventually just leave because your hours aren't going to be prorated, right? They say they're prorated, but then when it's time to make partner, they're looking at your hours over the past several years. So my decision to have a child at 40 was very calculated. I got married at 35, had a child at 40. And by that time I had, left the law firm, which was on purpose, because I knew when I was going to have a child, I needed to be away from the law firm and I wanted to go in-house at that point. And so that worked for me. Financially, it worked for me. And then my maturity, I'm a better older mom than I would have been a younger mom. So, it's what Debbie was saying. It's very individual. Depending on your career, how important it is to you, and the decisions, there's so many different factors that go into it, and there's no right or wrong answer.
And I'll just add again that this we're not here to fix women, or to even give you individual solutions, right? We're here to fix society. We hate mothers. We just do. We have motherhood on a pedestal in developed nations like the UK and the US, but we hate mothers. And we know that because we take the political and we make it personal. And so when you do that, right, then you end up in a situation where you think it's you. Like when I was forced out of the corporate workplace, I thought it was me. I thought my direct reports were taken away from me. I wasn't allowed to work from home on Friday. And I kept thinking, well, if I was a more valued member of the team, they would have allowed me to have these options. I had no idea that this was systemic and this was more than just me. And I also think we have to just call out men here. This is not an issue. Why are we all discussing this? Do men have to decide when they're having children? As my husband just walked into the room because we're away. We're actually in Silicon Valley right now for his birthday. But yeah, so it was, that what I always say is like, I wish that we can all come to the table with the same type of unencumbered mind as men have, to say, we will come here. Yes, we have caregiving responsibilities, but we have a truly equal partner at home. And so I think the way I look at these issues of the motherhood penalty are, we're not here to fix you. You can make your individual choices, but we're here to warn you and also say that, I'm the ghost of Christmas future, right? You're not going to do it as I did it, or you're going to do it better because you now have Sarah and you have a whole host of resources to know that you're not alone and that this is not about you. And I think if I had just known that, I think I would have been in a better place to advocate for my career, to plan. The last thing I will say, I think we've spent a lot of time in the life-changing magic of organizing our junk drawer. There's a lot of life-changing magic in long-term planning. And so this idea that it's never the right time, I don't agree with that. I actually think you can have a long-term plan. You can look at your financial situation. You can look at what your goals are when you're 20, 30, 40, or 50, because there's enough data now to show that long-term planning for women is real.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
think too, we have to, as Eve said, recognize it's a societal problem and normalize these conversations and bring men into the conversation. And that's happening organically with millennials today. Not to age any of us here, Siren, you're probably the youngest. And I know from the work that I do, when we're speaking to new dads, they're now experiencing what Eve, you and I experienced going up against our bosses, because that generation, which, like you said, 70% of the leaders there have stay-at-home wives, traditional families. That's not what society's developing right now. Millennial, women are not saying they want to bake cookies after school and serve it up with milk and a side of fruit. And so organically, the conversation's starting to change. And we as leaders have to just continue to push that ball forward.
So I'd love to build out off that and just throw back to our panelists to talk about what else needs to happen. So we're having these organic conversations. We're seeing millennials really start to change that conversation at a social and societal level. And what else needs to happen from employers and from governments for the motherhood penalty, the parenthood penalty to disappear?
I think that employers need to embrace this issue and to face it head on. They need to do a few things, several things, and this is part of the work that I do. First, you need to understand what is the culture at the company or the firm or the hospital or the school district or whomever this employer is. Then you have to do a deep dive assessment of the data. What is happening to women in the workplace and parents, right? Not just women, but men, and really understand if there are any pay disparities. There are several new laws. California just enacted one in December where it's forcing employers to do kind of a self-assessment of pay. And it needs to be reported to the Fair Employment and Housing Agency in California. And once you identify disparities, and there will always be disparities, just like with race in the workplace, it's not enough to say, oh, wow, there's a difference in how we're paying people. Then you have to figure out what is the root cause of it, right? Is it your, old school policies? Is it individual managers? Is it, separate business groups? Some business groups do better than others. What exactly is the problem? Are you allowing new employees to, are you basing current salaries on what someone was making at their prior employer? Are you allowing employees, and I encourage this, to negotiate salaries when they come in the door? Studies have shown that women do not negotiate as much as men do. And when I read that study some years ago, I said, oh, I can negotiate my salary, and that's what I do now out the gate. And don't be afraid to offend anyone, because if they want you and your talent, they're going to hire you. And so you really need to understand what the disparity is. The number one thing I see all the time is the concept of, and it happened to me, when you come back from leave and it's performance review time. You have to make sure that managers are trained to look at the time you were there. I think that was a great idea to do the performance review before you go out. And I think that's such a great idea. I'm taking it back to PagerDuty today, okay? Because it's really hard for managers to wrap their brains around quantity versus quality. And then when it's time for raises, managers are given a certain budget. And they're divvying up, the raises, and they're thinking, well, this guy or woman, they've been here, they've worked hard for 12 months, I want to give them the most. And this other person was here for 4 months. They get the least, right? And so what does that mean? That means that your HRBPs or HR at companies and, government, they need to be trained to identify when that is happening. It's always good to have in-house employment lawyers to kind of hover above to make sure, you know, everything is a-okay, but really owning making the changes. I have worked for companies where pay analysis has been done and then salaries went up. Right? It happened to me at one of my companies. It wasn't a gender issue, it was a race issue. And I had come in $30,000 less than what other people were making. And then I got this random raise and I was like, oh, score. But then it was, wait a minute, why did you pay me less coming in the door? Right? And so employers need to own it and make changes.
Thanks, Achia. I'd love to build on that and ask, so again, for Achia, you've advised all levels of management as an in-house counsel. You've been a litigator at law firms. How do you advise on workplace issues like pay equity, and without disclosing any privileged conversations? How would you generally approach conversations about pay equity with managers and leaders? And I'll throw on the end of that, we have audience members asking how often we can revisit our salaries with employers. And that's really a question for everyone.
What I've learned over the years is not to approach it like a lawyer, because when you say something's illegal and you talk about legal risk, every company has a different tolerance for risk. I've worked at very conservative companies and not so conservative companies. I like to approach it as more of a, let's talk about attrition. Let's talk about retention. Let's talk about attracting the best possible talent in the world to come work at this company. And half your talent is, you know, half are men, half are women. And so I also like to bring data, and I'm not a numbers person. So hopefully there's like a, you know, an analyst who can help me, you know, crunch the data. Companies, they like to see the bottom line, right? And if you show them data that, hey, look at how you're paying women, look at how you're promoting or not promoting working parents. It happens to men as well, right? And once you put the data in front of them and you talk about attrition and retention and transparency and actually making the changes and coming up with a budget to do it, right? And the timing is very important. If you do this analysis in the workplace, and employees can push employers to do this analysis in the workplace if they're not doing it, you are going to have disparities, period. Decide before you get that data what you're going to do. Are you going to increase salaries? Okay, fine. Let's get the budget for it. So it's you know, you don't want to just drop, hey, we need $500,000 to adjust pay, right? You want to do it on the right budget cycle. And the tone starts from the top. I try to convince leaders that to change the culture. You can't change culture bottom up. It has to be top down. And to communicate to the world, this is our culture here. And then we could talk about the legal risk, right? Once you get them all on board. So.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Beyond, you know, I think the suggestions that were just provided are awesome and incredible, but they're truly targeting the larger organization. And most employees, statistically speaking, don't work for, you know, the big Fortune 500s. And so what do you do when you're working for a mid-sized company and you're faced with these issues and they can't just pull money out of the pocket? And so there's like, while we say it's not your problem and it's a societal problem and we have to change the tide, at the same time as we do that, we do need to empower employees in order to speak up for themselves. So if they are at a smaller employer, you know, how are they going to have those conversations with their bosses? And I think, you know, some of the things that we touched upon, I just want to emphasize. Number one, speak up and ask for raises, not just when you're first getting hired, but at reviews. You know, argue your worth within an industry. What are your peers getting at similarly situated roles at other shops? Again, bringing up retention and attrition and always trying to make it a win-win, because we know the cost of replacing an employee can be upwards of 300% of somebody's salary by the time you bring in recruiting costs, that loss of the institutional knowledge that they walk away with, the loss of productivity, trying to pull in other team members to fill that hole. So it's oftentimes easy to find just a little bit of money, even if we're not tackling it wide scale, but we have to be advocates for ourselves. And as Eve so aptly said earlier, like, it's not a problem on you, but there is a responsibility to speak up for yourself. So that's one thing. Bring up your salary, you bring up your raise, bring up your performance review, push back in a very respectable way when it's appropriate. And then again, just before we go out on leave, if your company leave to have a baby, whether you're a male or female, because we are seeing some salary reverberations for working fathers as well, who take time off, now that we're starting to see the pendulum swing towards the larger companies offering leave for fathers as well. And pretty soon we'll be talking about not just the motherhood penalty, but there's a parenthood penalty, and another conversation. But really utilize that time before you go out on leave to highlight everything that you've done and ask for review and get it in writing. So that way, when you return and 6 months later, 3 months later, 3 weeks later, whatever it is, you have proof that, back before they forgot your worth, when you went out on leave, people around town thought that you were doing a really good job. And, here's the proof. And it's good to even bring that back up before raise and bonus and salary talks when they occur, depending on the timing of your leave.
And I'll just add one more thing about culture, because I think what Aisha was saying is really important. It's sort of like that nagging thing in the back of your head. You know your culture. And I think as an organizational manager, what I like to say is I work for family foundations and family businesses, the smaller organizations that Debi's talking about. And it's like the HBO show Succession. Everyone should feel bad for me. But what I learned in that context is that a well-functioning organization has three things, right? There's explicitly defined expectations, your role, and there's fairness and transparency. You can assess those three things from your organizations before you have children, if you're in that situation. Because at the end of the day, that nagging stuff, like, I knew in my heart of hearts that Sullivan and Cromwell was not going to be the place where I was going to have kids. I just knew it because I saw how staid that culture was. I had a great partner. I will call out John Evangelakis. He was an incredible mentor. But the culture, as Aisha said, it's more than just your manager. And so I think it's really, really important to know what your culture is going to be, so you don't feel shocked. I knew in the back of my mind, my direct reports were going to be pulled, right? So I think the other thing I will say is a practical advice is, again, someone who does organizational management lens, is that there's a lot of studies now that show frequent communication with a manager is much more effective for many outcomes than just performance review communication. So a lot of us think we don't want to bother our managers, or we just want to get things done. And that shows our worth because we're working seamlessly, but it's actually not the case. So what I would recommend is that even if you have a staff meeting, that you set up one-on-one check-ins with your manager, and you just say, I'm not here to overshare, or I just want 10 minutes a week. We can do it. We don't have to do it on Zoom. We can do it while we're just on the phone. I need 10 minutes a week. And then that way I can stay on my expectations, get your priorities straight. It'll lead us to much more efficiency, and I will be twice as efficient. But get that routine communication going with your manager, because then you can bring up hard things. It's not so difficult. You're not waiting for that scary review. If you want to start a family, you can start asking questions. And I wish I had done that. I wish I had developed that type of relationship with my manager earlier.
So, Ren, I just want to add one thing. Changing culture is hard. I think I read something a few years ago that it takes 2 to 3 years. What I've seen recently is how millennials approach it versus how Generation X approached it. And I've worked with all the generations. Millennials are very, not in your face, but it's like, this is what I need. This is what I want. You need to change. So there is strength in numbers, right? If your employer has employee groups, like the women's group, uh, what religious groups, race, whatever it is. And you get that team together, or even if you don't, if you get like people in the workplace together, take your issues directly to the head of HR, not, the people who report to them, but get them in a room. And I have seen this many times at one particular employer, won't tell you who, but get them in a room with all of you and say, these are the issues that we're seeing. We're seeing that women are treated X way, right? With respect to pay, with respect to maternity leaves. And you need to make a change, right? When it's just one employee kind of pushing back, they're not always heard. That's just the way it is. Sometimes managers are just super uncomfortable talking about the issue. They just are, right? But when you get everyone together, as many as you can, and you go to the head of HR, and if your company is small enough, go to the CEO, or the president, and say, hey, these are the issues that are important to us. What are you doing about it? That usually gets people to pay attention.
Yeah. And I would go even beyond that and say, band together and bring solutions, because of what exactly you want to play out. We see this all the time at Villyge. A huge portion of our clients have come through employee manifestos. So I'm here to tell you, it works. We see employees band together, go to HR, and they will say, like, here's what we're unhappy with, and here's a way to solve these problems. And that is when you can bring like a win-win solution to the table, where it's like, there's a problem, but we're going to HR make you look like a hero by rolling this out to change the culture. And don't march in with your combat boots on, but more of a have with the position of having an open dialogue. And yes, you do have some solutions, not just complaints. People are going to be ready with open ears.
Great. So we have thanks everyone. So we have some really great questions from the audience. So I'd love to move to those early and start with the ones around employers and the workplace. So from the start, I think we've talked a bit about managers and working with your direct manager and how managers play such a direct role in the motherhood penalty in your experience. So when it comes to telling your boss, telling your employer, at what stage of the family planning journey, pregnancy, and so on, is it best to disclose? And should we?
I think that's a personal and individual decision. There are some people that are just so giddy with the news and they're bursting at the seams and they want nothing more than to celebrate. Those are the, kind of akin to the person who loves celebrating their birthday. They get dressed that morning with a birthday crown, and that makes people happy. That's great. But it is your individual decision. You do not need to tell anybody. A lot of people will just go based off of culture and, what is acceptable, how much time are they going to need to, break the news to their work community. I mean, sometimes we are sick in the beginning of pregnancy. Sometimes we're experiencing loss, or we're dealing with fertility or adoption issues that are going to take us in and out of the workplace. And we're going to need to have those discussions with our manager to put them on notice that we're going to need extended PTO. And so it's absolutely, like we said earlier, with just timing, it's a personal decision for sure. And you should not be forced to do anything that you don't feel comfortable with personally.
Great, thank you. And then we have.
I think I evolved on that issue because I thought it was always great to just like surprise someone at the last minute, right? Wait till like 9 months And I'm not sure why, because I think that's what I was told by somebody, like, don't let them know. But the thing is, like, managers and in a corporation, right? They're human beings too. And so I think the idea of trust, right? Like, why didn't this person tell me? Why do they feel like they have to hide, right? So I've actually evolved on that issue. I think that, again, if you feel like there's an issue, talking early, even before you have kids, about your goals to be a parent, then again, that clue I was saying that you should think about when you think about whether or not that's the right place for you, right? If you're already feeling nervous about that disclosure, you're going to be penalized, then maybe before you have a family, like, you want to, while you have a lot of negotiating power, maybe go to a place that has a better culture. I think, as Aisha was saying before, with millennials, there are places that have done the manifesto already for you. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing, as I speak to places, there are places that pay their ERG leaders, whether it's women or BIPOC, who actually care about that and promotion and care about their ESG goals. There are companies that don't give a shit. And so I think that you can start asking these questions earlier, because the way that culture, how they pay their ERG leaders, whether how they, like you said, how they treat, multiple issues, not just parenthood. Those are things you can find out earlier. So that's all I would.
On notification, I notified my employer right at 12 weeks, just to get through that first trimester, partly because I had morning sickness for 9 months, and vertigo issues. Is very strange. And so I wanted my employer to know that, sometimes I may be, it wasn't morning sickness, it was kind of like all day sickness. Sometimes I may not be able to come in or may need to work from home. Also, I understood retaliation, the concept, as an employment lawyer. And so if you do disclose early, I can't sit here and tell you you won't be retaliated against. You might be, but you can protect yourself. Understand what retaliation is at your company. It is in the employment handbook. Hopefully your company or your agency, whomever, has an employee handbook, and retaliation should be defined. And you cannot be retaliated against because you are pregnant, because you are going on leave, because people may think, oh, this person isn't going to come back from leave. That is just straight up illegal. So understand your rights, and it is a personal decision when you disclose. I just erred on disclosing as soon as possible.
I will just say, I think everyone needs an Aisha in their lives, someone who's there to really prompt these, well, what can they legally do? And think through some of the, really, what do you have on your side as part of the equation? So I think on the topic of everyone needing an Aisha in their lives, well, let's actually move to a question, another audience member question that's more specific around culture as well, and how to assess that culture and broach conversations with employers. So for this individual, they're not familiar with anyone within the company having a child while employed there. So how would you handle, is it appropriate to talk to the manager or HR about what this person or parents' positions would look like as a new parent returning to that company? They travel a lot and they really want to understand how to understand whether there's flexibility, or at this point to look elsewhere.
Absolutely have that conversation. And the answer should be, for the most part, take the travel out of it. The answer should be, there is no change, right? You're coming back to the same exact job, which is, it's not just the law in the United States, it's the law all over the world. And you come back to your same job. Now, the travel thing gets kind of tricky, right? And I would have those conversations early as to, what can travel look like? Can we and come with some options, right? Can someone else handle the travel? Can we divide the travel? Now, anything can be done on Zoom, as we're all learning, right? And so I think that is actually going to change the game with respect to parenting and leave, just the world we're existing in right now.
Yeah. I know executives who needed to return to travel, pre-COVID, and they would have their companies foot the bill to bring a nanny along. So it's just a matter of sometimes of thinking outside of the box.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And so when it comes to just strategic messaging for another audience member, if you want to return to work part-time after maternity leave, but you're not giving up on your career, it's just this set length of time, how do you have that conversation without making it seem like we're just throwing in the towel?
I think it's just honesty. You just have to go to your manager and broach the subject. And this is not, unfortunately, a legal right that you have to all of a sudden cut your hours. So you're at risk of the manager saying no. And that was part of what caused my leave. I mean, forced exit. Thank you, leave. Thank you, Eve. From my previous job before I started this venture. And so you have to be honest with what you are going to need to be successful as a working parent and as a professional. And when you come to that conversation, though, be empowered with tools to make it win-win. It's going to cost the company a lot more to try and replace you and find someone full-time than maybe having you do part-time work and having a job share. Or again, it's a matter of thinking outside of the box and coming up with solutions and putting it in terms of what's not only best for you, but being a little cunning and what's best for your manager. How are you going to position it so at the end of the day, they can't do anything but say yes?
Absolutely love that. And so talking about solutions, I think everyone on this panel has mentioned how we need men as part of this, and millennial men are stepping up. So where there's already data that there is a penalty, a parental penalty, and something that men face when they take parental leave. So how do we keep encouraging men to take parental leave when they see that there's this penalty at work and they don't have to take it? I love that phrase for the audience member who asked that question. They don't have to take it, like those who are giving birth.
Well, statistics show that 80% of millennials value their time outside of work or see it as equal as their time inside of work. And when you look at Generation X, it wasn't like that, right? We put work first and we tried to cut out time to make ourselves available for family. It's changing. So I think some of that is just happening organically. Again, like what Asia said, like millennials are going to say, like, I need this. What's wrong with you? And we have to continue to encourage leaders. We're starting to see some CEOs, especially at tech firms, say, nope, I'm taking 6 months. I'm a dad, I'm the CEO, but I'm walking away and I'm going to set an example. And I think we have to, again, as Asia said, have that tone come from the top and have it more accepted at the upper echelons within a company and have it dribble down. So I think I think change does come bottoms up at the same time as it has to come top down. I think there has to be both. And so we're going to have this groundswell. At the same time, we have to, put more pressure on companies to do more than just throw words out there that, sure, it's a gender neutral policy, and let's really encourage our men to take leave.
Great.
And Sarah, I'll just say, we don't all have the privilege to decide where we work. But I think that as if you do, right, if you are younger listening here, again, we're the ghost of Christmas future. It is pretty easy to sniff out culture It's not hard. Like I said, I like to tell people to ask a few questions that maybe they wouldn't normally ask. Like again, do you have employee resource groups? Are your leaders paid to run those groups? What is your paternity leave policy? Ideal companies now have the same policy. There's no discrimination between primary caregiver and secondary caregiver. If you still have a company that has outdated policies where they call someone a primary caregiver and a secondary caregiver, that's probably a place where there's more likely to be a motherhood penalty, because they're not looking at men as equal as equals, right? Once men start taking things, right, there's going to be less. Once it normalizes in the culture, there's just going to be less. One thing I found interesting was a clue that doesn't always work. I always thought more women in leadership would be that clue, but I found out recently in a new study that parity, having women in leadership roles, does not translate to a lessening of the motherhood penalty. I was actually shocked by that. So I went out to my friend in the Census Bureau, Misty Hagenis, and I said, why? And she says she thinks it's because managers have a lot more to do with your direct motherhood penalty right now than maybe the parity at the top. And then ultimately it's what Aisha said, it comes down to culture.
Yeah. Also look at the benefits packages and see, what sorts of benefits are provided for working parents. Do they do breast milk shipping? Do they have any one-on-one support? Do they have caregiving stipends?
I was just going to add, what I found at companies is that when there are women in leadership and they have children, they have nannies, right? 24-hour nannies and extra people to pick up things, and just like they have like a little support, like a little company at home. And so sometimes I think they don't identify with us who do not have nannies and a staff at home. And so Eve, I thought of that when you mentioned that about women in leadership at companies.
So we are running close on time. So we have one last question from the audience, and then I have a wrap-up question for all three of you to be able to introduce a bit more of what you're doing. So that final question from the audience: thoughts on the current pandemic with so many women working from home, providing childcare and schooling? What's going to be the effect on the gap in the future?
I think it's going to be huge. I think all the jobs lost in the United States in December were women either leaving the workforce or significantly reducing their hours. And we know that the longer you're out, the harder it is to compete, because then you have a gap in your resume. I think the effects are going to be, unfortunately, long lasting. And I can't think of a solution off the top of my head, except for people just understanding and hiring people back.
Yeah, we've lost 5.4 million women out of the workforce since the beginning of the pandemic. So I guess we're looking at a year ago today, right? That's pretty shocking. So a year ago today, we had more women in the workforce than men. And at this point in time, we've backtracked our numbers to a participation rate that's equal to that of the 1980s. So what that means is we've also lost a pipeline to the top. And this is going to set us back for years. So I urge, I'm going to challenge employers out there to think about how are they going to fast track that pipeline? How are we going to, not leave it to chance, but really put true effort in recruiting women and encouraging women, creating mentorships, creating ways to empower women, because there are psychological differences between the way women think and act and speak and men. And how are we going to normalize this and level the playing field so that way there can be parity in the future? And unless we really truly pay attention to it, we're not going to get where we need to be. At the same time, we are at a crossroads where there is a lot of opportunity. I know so many working mothers who have asked for that remote possibility to work from home or to have flexibility in their schedule. Well, the pandemic has shown us worldwide that it can be done. So this is also an opportunity, I think, for more working women to get more working mothers to dip their toe back in the workforce and, be able to find remote jobs that will allow them to be there at home because they don't have, the support staff at home and are able to play dual roles. But it's going to take a lot of culture shifts on everybody's part. So I think it's an opportunity, but it's a steep road ahead.
Thanks,
and I always think
everyone.
about class of workers, I'll just say, right? So we know Black women are paid, what, 60 cents on the dollar for every white non-Hispanic man. That's a class of worker. You have, women versus men and how they're paid. And now I'm worried about the class of workers of work from home and back in the office. Because does that become part of another class of workers where the person who gets the FaceTime is going to get the promotion? So I think if you're going to take those, if a company's, I challenge companies, you have to offer this to everybody. If someone's coming back in the office, are those unconscious biases going to now lead to the men who are white who have stay-at-home wives, which is what our leadership looks like today, right? So I think we just have to keep pushing and pushing to say that it's not okay to have these classes of employees, whether it's of counsel and partner, paying obviously people of color less, paying women less. And so this is a sea change. And I think just us talking about it, as someone nicely said in the chat, these were not discussions that Gen X had. We were of the generation that we want to be like men still. And so we want to be the ideal worker. And now we have to realize that the world has changed. Work from home is not flexible work. Flexibility is nothing if you don't have predictability for care. And so we have to have a more nuanced conversation now that we're even talking about these things.
Right. There's a new definition of flexibility going forward.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I know we're at time now, so I will wrap with to just thank the audience, and we'll do an outro from everyone of where people can find you and what piece of this motherhood penalty you're hoping to contribute to and help change. So I'll start that. We're MIRZA on all the socials at MIRZA Says Hey, and it's heymirza.com. And we're working on the affordability of care and long-term planning, as Eve mentioned.
I'm Debi Yadegari, founder and CEO of Villyge, Villyge. That's Villyge.com and on all socials, Villyge. And we are partnering with employers to change the workplace.
Achia.swift at Gmail, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And I can talk about this stuff all day long. So happy to chat.
I love spiritual friends like this. I'm Eve Rodsky on Instagram. We answer DMs. Fair Play Life is our account just devoted to the gender division of labor. And what I'm fighting for is that we have a society where an hour holding our children's hand in the pediatrician's office is just as valuable as an hour in the boardroom.
Man.
And on that note, thank you, everyone. Thanks for everyone who hung late. And thank you so much to our panelists for your time. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.